Oh, good morning, protege, or of course, good afternoon to my wonderful eighth period class, my favorite class in the afternoon. Hey, I hope this direct instructional Zoomcast finds you well. So we're getting really, really close now to the end of the Great Depression. So this is going to be my direct instruction for Tuesday. It's two for Tuesday. I say double the pleasure. You say double the fun. Tuesday, and this is November 16th, 2021. Let's get into it, shall we? You guys know the drill at this point. So you already should have had your notes dated for today. So make certain, again, on your desk, you need to have a blue or black pen, multiple colored highlighters, correctable tape, but I'm again going to respectfully ask, please do not be highlighting and cleaning up your ISN during the direct instructional Zoomcast. Your job is to focus on the Zoomcast, observing, listening, taking really good copious notes in your ISNs. Then when the Zoomcast ends and comes to a conclusion, then you can commence with cleaning up and highlighting your work. All right, so on the top line, write down for me accomplishments of FDR. So we're going to continue on with Franklin Delano Roosevelt's accomplishments as our nation's first, again, not our first president, but the first president that was greatly influenced as a young man by the progressive era. So to recap again, you go back to when Franklin Roosevelt was sworn in March of 1933. As soon as he's sworn in, he makes this a famous inaugural speech. Again, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And remember again how I taught you how he relied on his brain trust, his group of economic advisors, a lot of college professors. Again, they were not politicians. They were not interested in furthering their career. They were interested in helping Franklin Roosevelt and deal with the worst economic crisis in American history. So again, to recap, so one of the first things Roosevelt does is he closes all the banks down for 4 days, from March 4th through March 8th. And then Congress is going to pass the Emergency Banking Relief Act, 1933. The banks are now going to slowly start to reopen again. Two catches. Number one, the banks have to justify they have enough capital and money to reopen, otherwise they're not allowed to. And number two, in conjunction with, again, the Emergency Banking Relief Act, Congress passes what's called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, in which the federal government, in essence, acts like an insurance company, and they're going to guarantee up to $5,000. If you got to have up to $5,000 of money in a bank, and if something happened where, again, that bank happened to close its door, the government would guarantee that your money would still be there and you'd still have access to it. So this was a huge, huge step. And we also learned about how Roosevelt realized that the 18th Amendment was not working. So really quickly, in his first 100 days, what Roosevelt's going to do is he's going to ask Congress and the states to work together. The 21st Amendment is ratified to the Constitution. And what the 21st Amendment did was it basically negated, it repealed the 18th Amendment. Prohibition is now, no pun intended, history. All right, let's get into it. Please write this down. So this is astounding to me. So Roosevelt is inaugurated that first week of March of 1933. If you look at the dates between March 9th through June 16th of 1933, Congress, again, at the behest of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, are going to work together as a team, putting aside political differences, Democrats, Republicans, all working together for a common good. What a concept. Something that maybe, again, our leaders today can learn from the past of, again, putting aside your differences and then working together to help our nation through a major crisis, whether you're dealing with a pandemic now or you're dealing with the Great Depression then. And in a period of a couple of months, Congress and Roosevelt are going to pass and sign 15 brand new laws. And they did this in under 4 months. Some presidents don't do this in 4 years. So what it really ties into, again, and I would draw a line off to the side and add this as a side oral note. Remember how Roosevelt, he loved models, he loved slogans, and one of his favorites was action. Action now. We're going to take chances. We're going to try to deal with the Great Depression. If it works, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. We'll try something different. All right, let's move on. So now I want to talk about another major accomplishment of Roosevelt. So besides, again, the first 100 days, which I just finished up, and again, surrounding himself with his brain trust, another major thing Roosevelt was remembered for in his presidency were called his fireside chats. So I'd like you to write this down. So we're going to make a connection. So Roosevelt, remember, in the 1920s, contracted polio in 1921. So for several years, from 1921 through 1924, Franklin Roosevelt disappeared from the public eye. And he used that time to rehab, to learn how to walk with braces, learn to walk with crutches. He needed a wheelchair every so often to get around, but he really tried to be as mobile as possible. He wanted to project an image in his mind of physical strength. Now, during that time, he used to listen, like a lot of Americans, to Calvin Coolidge on the radio. Remember, we had a chance to listen to Calvin Coolidge giving a speech in 1924 about cutting taxes. Now, Roosevelt watched Coolidge from a political perspective, and he realized how Calvin Coolidge was truly the first president who effectively understood the importance of using the radio to again, get out there and reach the American people and convey a message. In Coolidge's case, it was cutting taxes. In Roosevelt's case, it's going to be his New Deal. And if you direct your attention up to my laptop screen, here's Roosevelt giving one of his fireside chats. Notice CBS and, of course, NBC. ABC is still a few years away as a major network. So what were the purposes behind the fireside chats? Number one, Roosevelt is a teacher. So one of the things that Roosevelt tries to do through the fireside chats was to share his ideas with the American people of what he was trying to do in tackling the Great Depression. And what the beauty of Roosevelt was, because Roosevelt was not necessarily the greatest of students and he struggled academically, he realized that, again, if you try to be too sophisticated, people aren't going to understand what you say. So when Roosevelt tried to explain what he was trying to do in dealing with the Great Depression through his program called the New Deal, which I'll be teaching you about, he tried to explain it in a very user-friendly manner. So instead of just saying to the American people, this is what we're going to do, he's explaining to the American people, this is what we're going to do. And number two, the other main purpose behind the fireside chats is what Roosevelt was trying to do was to inspire hope. I said this in one of my previous Zoomcasts, folks. Franklin Roosevelt was one of the greatest psychologists of any American president. He didn't have a degree in psychology, but he understood the human mind, the human psyche. And he knew what people needed right now. Something they didn't get from former President Herbert Hoover was a sense of hope. So I can't think of anybody that I would compare Franklin Roosevelt to than our old friend, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey, again, made not millions, but billions of dollars. And what she was able to do was to sell people one thing. And that one thing was hope. And that's what Franklin Roosevelt was trying to do with those, again, fireside chats. All right, let's continue on. So what I would like everybody to do is I'd like you to skip a full page. I want you to go to the right side of the next clean sheet of paper. You're going to come back to those notes. Don't worry. Make certain that you date your notes again for today. It is November 16th, 2021. And I want you to write down for me audio clip, Franklin or FDR fireside chat. We'll use the acronym. So this audio clip is going to be a bit like The Shadow that we watched a couple of weeks ago. So you're going to actually look at a picture of Franklin Roosevelt, but you're going to have to really listen carefully to his words and his message, because that's what you're going to be focusing on. So I'm going to go through these guide questions fairly quickly. You need to make certain you write these down. If I'm going too quickly, the beauty of the Zoomcast, I love the fact that you guys continue as I'm walking around the room, you're pausing it, giving yourself a chance to get caught up. Great job. That's exactly why I love these Zoomcasts. All right, so here we go. Number one. So what was the theme of Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chat, this particular one? And as a good teacher, he establishes the theme very quickly at the very beginning of the chat. So you better listen really carefully because he outlines it pretty quickly. Number two, second guide question. This dovetails off the first one. What did he, Franklin Roosevelt, try to explain and teach to the American people? And again, this is the beauty of Roosevelt. He wasn't just sitting there and pontificating and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. He explained why he was going to do that. He wanted this to make sense to the American people, because if it makes sense to you, you are going to buy into it a lot better and a lot more easily. Number three, what were the three stages that President Roosevelt proposed in reforming the banking system? And again, when you listen to him speak in this fireside chat, I love the way he methodically sets this up and organizes it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so if you would please direct your attention up to my, again, laptop screen. I don't think I'm going to play the full video or audio clip. It's about a little over 5 minutes long. So here we go. You got to really use your imaginations as you listen to Franklin Roosevelt speaking in your great-grandparents' parlor or living room in March of 1933, one of his very first fireside chats. Here we go.
My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done and what the next steps are going to be.
See how he outlines it?
I recognize that the many proclamations from state capitals and from Washington, the legislation, the Treasury regulations, and so forth, couched for the most part in banking and legal terms, ought to be explained for the benefit of the average citizen. I owe this in particular because of the fortitude and the good temper with which everybody has accepted the inconvenience and the hardships of the banking holiday. And I know that when you understand what we in Washington have been about, I shall continue to have your cooperation as fully as I have had your sympathy and your help during the past week. First of all, let me state the simple fact that when you deposit money in a bank, the bank does not put the money into a safe deposit vault. It invests your money in many different forms of credit, in bonds, in commercial paper, in mortgages, and in many other kinds of loans. In other words, the bank puts your money to work to keep the wheels of industry and of agriculture turning round. A comparatively small part of the money that you put into the bank is kept in currency, an amount which in normal times is fully sufficient to cover the cash needs of the average citizen. In other words, the total amount of all the currency in the country is only a comparatively small proportion of the total deposits in all the banks of the country. What then happened during the last few days of February and the first few days of March? Because of undermined confidence on the part of the public, there was a general rush by a large portion of our population to turn bank deposits into currency or gold. A rush so great that the soundest banks couldn't get enough currency to meet the demand. The reason for this was that on the spur of the moment, it was of course impossible to sell perfectly sound assets of a bank and convert them into cash, except at panic prices far below their real value. By the afternoon of March 3rd, a week ago last Friday, scarcely a bank in the country was open to do business. Proclamations closing them in whole or in part had been issued by the governors in almost all of the states. It was then that I issued the proclamation providing for the national bank holiday. And this was the first step in the government's reconstruction of our financial and economic fabric. The second step, last Thursday, was the legislation promptly and patriotically passed by the Congress, confirming my proclamation and broadening my powers so that it became possible, in view of the requirement of time, to extend the holiday and lift the ban of that holiday gradually in the days to come. This law also gave authority to develop a program of rehabilitation of our banking facilities. And I want to tell our citizens in every part of the nation that the National Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, showed by this action a devotion to public welfare and a realization of the emergency and the necessity for speed that it is difficult to match in all our history. The third stage has been the series of regulations permitting the banks to continue their functions to take care of the distribution of food and household necessities and the payment of payroll. This bank holiday, while resulting in many cases in great inconvenience, is affording us the opportunity to supply the currency necessary to meet the situation. Remember that no sound bank is a dollar worse off than it was when it closed its doors last week. Neither is any bank which may turn out not to be in a position for immediate opening. The new law allows the 12 Federal Reserve banks to issue additional currency on good assets, and thus the banks that reopen will be able to meet every legitimate call. The new currency is being sent out by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in large volume to every part of the country. It is sound currency because it is backed by actual good assets.
So a couple of takeaways. And again, number one, as a teacher, you love the way he set this up. He starts out, he clearly establishes this is the purpose behind this fireside chat. The way he breaks it down in a manner that's easy for people to follow along. And to me, the biggest takeaways is number one, he's basically telling people, this is why you can't do bank runs, because again, banks don't have all this money in the bank. They're taking your money and they're investing it in other things, as he explained. And so what he's trying to tell people to me is two things. Number one, stop withdrawing your money from the bank and causing panic and bank runs. And number two, you need to stop leaving your money in your mattress and start putting your money back in the banks. That's the only way we're going to get out of this economic crisis. Again, a truly masterful speech, being both a teacher and also a psychologist, and trying to basically soothe the feelings of the American people and ensure them we're going to get through this together. That's Franklin Roosevelt. All right, let's continue on. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I want you to go back to the previous page. Let's move on to his next accomplishment. So the fourth major accomplishment. So we talked about the brain trust. We talked about the first 100 days. You learned about, again, the whole idea of him trying to reach the American people through his fireside chats. There was no television yet. That's still a few years into the future. Internet is decades away. Radio was the main means to be able to reach the American people. So now we're going to get into what's called the New Deal. So whenever you think of Franklin Roosevelt, that's the first thing that should come to your mind is the New Deal. So again, Roosevelt, working in conjunction with his brain trust, wants to create a plan for tackling the worst economic crisis in American history. Again, we had a depression in 1837. It was called the Panic of 1837. We had a depression in 1873. We had a depression in 1894. But never to the magnitude of this one. So President Roosevelt, working with his brain trust, again, are going to focus on three specific goals. Here we go. Goal number one, relief. And he's going to use some alliteration, the 3 R's. And when you think about relief, it's really one thing. The way to relieve the American people's issues is getting them working again. Because if you get them working, they're making money. If they're making money, they're buying things. And remember, kids, every time I say this again and again and again, every time you buy something, you are creating a job for somebody else. Make a little side note off to the side. Don't just rely on those bullet notes. Number two, then we focus on the second R, recovery. So now what he's going to do is he's going to focus on creating, again, programs. These programs are designed, or agencies are designed to help America recover from the Great Depression. And then finally, number three, the last of our R's, reform. All three of these terms, by the way, are on your study guide. All three of them will be on your examination coming up very, very soon. So reform. So Roosevelt's third goal in working in conjunction with his brain trust, again, Adolph Burley and Raymond Moley, those are your two ringleaders of the brain trust. They wanted to ensure that something like this Great Depression would never happen again. 2008, 2009, transitioning from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, we were in what was called the Great Recession. There was a very real chance we could have gone into another horrific economic depression, but because of some of the things that Franklin Roosevelt put into place, working in conjunction with his brain trust, that's why the Great Recession of 2008, 2009 never became another Great Depression. So thank you, former President Franklin Roosevelt. So if you direct your attention up to the overhead screen, what a great photograph. FDR and the, of course, New Deal. And again, I love the quote at the bottom. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Here's Franklin Roosevelt, master teacher, and even a greater psychologist in understanding what the American people need right now. All right. So we're going to skip over this because we already covered it. All right. So I'd like you to write this down. So there were several really important programs and agencies created by the New Deal. Now, Franklin Roosevelt has two New Deals. There's the first New Deal that starts in 1933, and then there's the second New Deal that starts in 1935. So we're going to be talking about some programs and agencies. Some are in the first New Deal, and some are in the second New Deal. All right, number one. So one of the most important programs created in the first New Deal is what we call the Civilian Conservation Corps, not corpse. It's pronounced Corps, C-O-R-P-S. So another thing you guys need to know, when you're talking about these different agencies or programs like the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, you're going to notice a lot of acronyms now. This is where it gets a little bit confusing, but we're going to get through this together. So remember to put periods between your capital letters. That's what we always do whenever you are addressing, of course, the New Deal. And this is the first one. All right. So if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, or to my laptop, I should say, I'm so used to saying that when I used to directly lecture, all these young men were members of what we call the Civilian Conservation Corps. All right. So what did they do? We're going to get there. All right. So basically, what Franklin Roosevelt was trying to do with the CCC in working in conjunction with his brain trust was the Civilian Conservation Corps is going to link two things at the same time. He's going to join them together. So number one, jobs, 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 jobs. That's the most important thing. What is going to happen under the first and second New Deals is the federal government is going to replace the automobile industry as the single largest employer of getting people working again. That's the only way you're going to get out of this depression, getting people working, getting people buying things, which will in turn create new jobs. So number two, but it also ties in with conservation, conserving our natural resources, the land, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the animals, the plants, the flora, the fauna. And I don't think it's coincidence, and I would draw a line off to the side. I would add this as a side note, the influence of his cousin Theodore, who was the first conservation president, truly. I don't think it's coincidence that Roosevelt tied conservation with job relief with the CCC. So if you direct your attention up to the overhead screen, I love this little political cartoon. It's only good till the last drop. Then what? Conserve now. Amen to that. All right. So I want you to write this down. So the Civilian Conservation Corps, now what was interesting is it only recruited young men between the ages of 18 to 25. They would not accept you if you were younger, and they would not accept you if you were older. Now, if this were a regular direct instruction like I used to before the pandemic, I would ask you, well, yours truly, Mr. Bonk, I'm 59. Could I join the CCC? Well, the answer is obviously no. But why would I not? Why do you suppose that Roosevelt targeted this particular age demographic? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to now pause the Zoomcast. I want you to draw a line off to the side. I want you to take 30 seconds Explain for me why 18 to 25-year-old men were targeted to work in the CCC. And then when you're done, turn the Zoomcast back on. I, of course, am going to continue on. So what's the answer? Because the work is going to be physically demanding. And Roosevelt felt that anybody younger or anybody older than this would find the work a little too taxing. All right, so what's the CCC going to do? Please write this down. So what the CCC is going to do is it's going to create what we call a shelter belt. So I'm going to go a little more ecology and conservation now. We're going to get there in a second. So what you're going to do is create a shelter belt that's going to cover a huge chunk of the United States of America. So to the far north, you're going to have the border of Canada. So on the border between Canada and the United States, up, say, by the Dakotas, North Dakota. You go north of North Dakota, you're in one of the provinces of Canada. And you're going to go all the way south down to Texas, the Texas Panhandle. So this is covering a swatch of well over 1,000 miles. So if you direct your attention up to the overhead screen or my laptop screen, so here you got your Dakotas right here. There's North Dakota, South Dakota, you got Nebraska, you got Kansas, you got Oklahoma, you got Texas. And then you got a swatch of some other states, New Mexico. You got over here, you got Colorado, that's Wyoming, and up here you've got Montana. But primarily, see where I'm circling with my arrow? That's what you're focusing on. That's where the shelter belt's going to be, primarily. Canadian border way up here, all the way down to the Texas Panhandle here. So what are they exactly doing? Well, the answer is this. So back in the 1800s, that area I shared with you, that's what it looked like, very barren. So settlers moving across the Great Plains were cutting all the trees down to farm it. The problem is the Great Plains are very windy, and the trees stymie and slow up erosion. Without the trees, now you got a serious erosion issue of dirt. Like you learn about the Dust Bowl that's mentioned in chapter 32 of the Great Plains. So what the shelter belt's going to do is this is eventually going to look like that. So what this shelter belt is going to do, and draw a line off to the side, is the CCC is going to plant not hundreds, not thousands, but literally millions of trees. From basically the border between North Dakota and Canada, all the way down to Texas. And that's the shelter belt. By planting trees and letting them take root, in theory, you would cut back on, the erosion of the dirt and avoid future dust storms, and restore it to the land the way it was before, again, the settlers start crossing on their way to California, crossing the Great Plains. All right, let's continue on. So this is going to be the last major agency I'm going to go over with you guys today, and then I'm going to finish the other agency with you guys tomorrow. So I want to introduce to you what's called the Works Progress Administration. So the Works Progress Administration is one of the most important of all the things that Roosevelt did with regards to the New Deal. So the Works Progress Administration goes by the nickname, it goes by what we call the WPA. And remember to put periods between the letters. So if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, this was a podium that was created for the Works Progress Administration. So a little bit more background information on the Works Progress Administration. Number one, so this is going to be, and I want you to draw a line off the side after you write down what it built. This is going to be as part of the second New Deal. So keep that in mind. This is the second New Deal. So this is, again, 1934 into 1935. So what the WPA is going to do is it's going to go and it's going to start doing some serious building. So what the WPA is going to do is going to, starting number one, it's going to start building lots of hospitals, not just in the cities, but throughout all of the United States of America. Number two, in addition, besides that, going to also be building lots and lots and lots of schools. And I have a very personal story that I'm going to share with you guys very shortly. Number three, and by the way, before we go any further, if you direct your attention up to my screen or my laptop screen, So this picture is of a school that's very important to me. That was my high school that I attended in Chicago. It's called Charles P. Steinmetz High School, 3030 North Mobile Avenue in the far northwest side of this, or on the far northwest side of the city. So for years, I used to think that Steinmetz was a WPA school. This is the front of the school. This is the East Campus, beautiful school. Not. It turns out that Steinmetz's roots actually goes all the way back to the time of World War I. Let's continue on. However, I have another photograph to share with you. So this is a photograph of a WPA school. This was built, by the Works Progress Administration. By the way, by 1935, the WPA had employed at this point over 3 million people were working for the WPA in some capacity. They were either, again, building schools or airports, artisans putting on plays, or again, drawing murals, which we'll get to. So getting back to this photograph, this is a very special one. That is a photograph of the front of Arthur E. Canty School. Arthur E. Canty School is a WPA school that was built by the Works Progress Administration under the direction of Franklin Roosevelt. Arthur E. Canty School is the grammar school that I attended from 1967 all the way until I graduated from 8th grade in 1976. So in Chicago, you don't go to separate schools like we here do in Buffalo Grove. There are no middle schools or junior highs. You go to the same school from kindergarten all the way to through 8th grade. So every day I would walk up this pathway until when I entered into the school itself. Pretty cool. So in addition to hospitals, in addition to schools, the WPA also built airports. Remember, let's make our connection. Charles Lindbergh, Amelia Earhart made suddenly people thinking flying in an airplane to be cool. And now that means of transportation is going to start to increase. Well, if that's the case, you're going to have some airports to be able to support the number of people wanting to fly now. Parks are going to be created throughout, especially cities in Chicago, my hometown, giving people places to go and commune with nature and getting away from the hustle and bustle of the big cities. And as I mentioned earlier, hiring artists to paint beautiful murals, musicians to put on performances, musicals, actors to put on plays. This is again, and by the way, I would draw a line off to the side. This is more Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin's wife, the first lady. She felt it was very important psychologically that the American people have something to do to take their mind off their worries of dealing with the Great Depression. And again, whether it's going to watch a musical or watching a play or looking at a beautiful piece of art, this all ties in with the master psychology of the Roosevelts and the way they wanted to deal and cope with the Great Depression. So if you direct your attention up to my laptop screen, this was a mural that was painted by an artist who had been commissioned by the WPA to paint it. There's some beautiful murals. As a matter of fact, there's a high school in the northwest side of Chicago called Lane Tech. And I remember a couple of years ago, they were restoring a beautiful mural that had been created back when the WPA was doing its thing. So I want you to do me a favor. I want you to put your pens down for a few moments. I want to share with you a very special video clip. You're not going to take notes on it. And no, you're not going to fast forward. I want you to watch this. So I found this video a couple years ago, and this is a promotion video of Arthur E. Canty School, where yours truly, Mr. Bonk, attended from 1967 all the way to 1976. Now, keep in mind, this is Chicago. This is in Buffalo Grove. Do you see any similarities or do you see any differences between Canty School and Aptekissick Junior High? You tell me. Here we go.
Because of the iPads, we have seen an increase in the number of students who are college and career ready. Also, we have seen gains in our language arts, science, and math stand-on results. Through the use of iPads, students are learning how to become the leaders of tomorrow.
Boy, it certainly brings back a lot of fond
Thank you
memories.
to the Illinois State Board of
Hold that
Education
thought.
for providing the opportunity for teachers and students like us to become more technologically proficient.
So what I was saying earlier is it's fun when I watched that promotional video. It's interesting. There was parts of it, the hallways, it looks very similar to when I was there, and that's going on 50 years ago. But also there's been obviously a lot of changes to the school, and certainly one of the biggest ones is there were no iPads back in 1976. All right, so here's what we're going to do. At this point, I think I'm going to stop my Zoomcast, and what I'm going to do is on my next Zoomcast, I'm going to finish up the WPA. I'm going to share a great video clip on it. And then I'm going to talk about some of the other agencies and programs of the New Deal, things like the NRA, things like the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and one that's very, very important on a very personal level to yours truly, Mr. Bonk, and that's the Social Security Act of 1935. So at this point, what I'm going to ask everybody to do, now I want you to take out your correctable tape, and I want you to go and clean up anything you crossed out or traced over. There's no crossing out, no tracing over. This is supposed to be a portfolio of your absolute best effort. Now, in addition, I want to see multiple colored highlighters, tip of the tip. Use different colored highlighters to denote different pieces of information. Some of you are getting really good at it. Some of you still need to work on it. And don't highlight everything. That becomes coloring. When you're done, you're not finished, you're not packing up yet. You're going to go and you're going to review your ISN to 10 to 15 minutes. Remember, you practice for baseball, you practice for cricket, you practice for soccer. You got to practice for school every single day. If you have an opportunity tonight, hand your ISN to somebody in your house, your mom, your dad, a brother, sister, somebody who had me earlier, maybe an aunt or an uncle that had me decades ago, and you channel your inner Mr. Bonk. You teach the information from today. Talk again in terms of what were some of the other things that Franklin Roosevelt did in his first 100 days, besides closing the banks and reopening them with the Emergency Banking Relief Act and ratifying the 21st Amendment. Talk about, for example, some of the bills that were passed. How many did he pass in basically a 4-month period of time? What were his fireside chats? What were the two purposes behind it? What was he hoping to achieve? Talk about that video clip. What was the purpose behind that, again, that audio clip that you guys watched, that, again, with regards to Roosevelt giving his fireside chats, and how he broke it down in a very user-friendly manner. Then talk about the New Deal. Remember, what were the 3 R's? So you can think about alliteration. What were the 3 keys that Roosevelt hoped to achieve? And he relied heavily on his brain trust in terms of creating the 3 R's in terms of dealing with the New Deal and creating the New Deal and dealing with the Great Depression. And then talk about, for example, I introduced the WPA, which I'm going to be finishing up tomorrow. Anything else that I covered today? Get into detail. Talk about it. What was the purpose behind it? What was Franklin Roosevelt trying to do in dealing with the worst economic crisis in American history? And again, I hope you enjoyed today's Zoomcast as much as you can tell. I love making these. And as I always like to say, as I wrap up one of my Zoomcasts, the story may have ended today, but the saga is going to continue tomorrow. And the rest, as we say, everyone, is history. Peace out, everybody. Thank you so much. And as always, be well.